Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here and glad for you to come here and be interested in something that is sort of sobering and important for all of us. And I want to start off with the background that is the stage for all of our lives currently, which are the major cities. Cities have been developed over years to facilitate economic growth, social interactions, and general human flourishing. So what's the problem? The problem is that now that we have squeezed ourselves in these little spaces, that's bearing both on our mental and our physical and our spiritual health. Most importantly, it is sort of sequestering us into areas that are unnatural and, given our evolutionary past, sort of unconducive to our well-being and health. And in this sort of mega jungles, we see a rise of disease. And it's not only for people who live in these very large, big cities, but also people who are wanting to get in. As you can see, if you look at the global burden of disease, that rates of heart disease are climbing. This used to be a problem that was only prevalent in industrialized societies where people were more affluent and had more leisure time. But it's gradually creeping up in all parts of the world, and even developing countries are now facing this brunt of a chronic disease burden now that we have conquered much of infectious diseases. So why is this happening? Why is it that we suddenly see this rise of these sort of chronic diseases around the world, and what is it that we can do about it? Maybe it is in some way linked to the environment that we are in, maybe the environment that we grow up and we live in, which is a complex mixture of our social, cultural, ecological, economic, and built environment that we have created around us is unnatural to us as humans that we have for so long evolved and developed into. The type of cognitive functions, the type of physiological activities that we have evolved and developed have depended upon our communication with nature and with elements of nature. And now we have created this artificial world around ourselves to which we are completely alienated from. So now we need to learn that maybe it is that living in these unconducive environments, maybe in dyssynchrony with the rhythms of the environment, the changes of the seasons, the circadian rhythms of night and day that we have so flagrantly overlooked and violated, maybe that's the reason that we have this increasing levels of sickness. And then a mismatch between our genes, that we have been adapted to a different environment from what we are in now. And so that is sort of bearing upon our health and the health of the well-being, and it has become increasingly difficult for us to maintain at least good health. We know that our children and our grandchildren will be the first generation since the Industrial Revolution who would have a shorter lifespan than we did. And that's because of the rise of chronic disease around the world. So how do we understand the environment? How do we look at it? When we could look at different components of the environment. There is the natural environment, which is the nights and day, the light, the greenery around us, the mountains, the nature itself. But we are sort of removed from that. We create around ourselves a social environment, which is in some sense was to make ourselves immune from nature, because we thought nature is nice and it's beautiful. The birds are good, it's very pretty and bucolic, but nature is also red in tooth and claw. Nature is not always conducive to human health. And nature is not something that is going to bend over and sort of let us be on our path. It treats us just like any other of its creations. And then to further sort of safeguard us against the social environment, we create small little personal environments around ourselves. And these environments also could have important bearing on health, our lifestyle choices, what we choose to eat, drink, or what we choose to do. All of these collectively bear upon our health. And components of these environments then would be important in our physical well-being, our mental well-being, as well as our spiritual well-being. But most of the components of these environments that we cannot alter. One general thing that we share with everyone else, especially living in urban environments, is the problem of air pollution, which I study nearly for the last 10 or 15 years. And this the problem of the environment is pervasive. Around the world, 7 million people die prematurely because of heart disease and facing high levels of air pollution. Even in the United States, where we think the air is clean, 220,000 people die every year. And this problem is related to the development of chronic disease, that we have created this artificial environment around us that not only sort of stunts our well-being, but also creates disease and misery in the world. And most of the major burden of this pollution is heart disease. And coming back to home, we were asked to talk about Kentucky. So as you can see, if you look at the levels of air pollution around the country, it is right in the heart of the Ohio Valley that we see one of the highest levels of pollution in the country. It's like a wound in the heart of the nation. This is where all this pollution that comes from the East Coast, downwind from Chicago, accumulates and leads to very high levels of what we call small particulate air pollution. And that has important bearing on the health, not only of our people, but also of our children and of our environment. And so we can see that this would lead to not only local changes, but also global changes. What is happening here is not unique to us, it's happening around the world. I'm sure you heard stories about China and India and how those countries are facing this enormous burden of air pollution, which is leading to a sort of a change in the climate of the world and has effects worldwide. And these effects have led to an progressive increase in the temperature of the planet for the last 30 years. And every year, we have exceeded the bounds of natural variability. And we have been unable to contain this increase in the temperature of the Earth. It may be a slight increase, but it makes a big difference. Accompanied with that, we have been spewing out huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And that's nothing new. The planet has seen this before. We've had carbon dioxide production whenever there are volcanoes and eruptions and meteors hit the planet. We had these huge jumps in carbon dioxide, right? But we have never seen this before. Since 1950, we have seen this level that the planet has never experienced. And now this is going to continue to increase unless we do something drastic, unless we change and doing things as business as usual, we are not going to be able to contain this problem. All of this has happened since the pre-industrial time. And you can see that because of this, there is this widespread pollution. In the Mediterranean, the levels of ozone have doubled over the few years. And this is suffocating the plant life and animal life. If you go to the coral reefs, you will find that the huge levels of coral have been bleached, and they're all as pale as death. And if you look at the Indian Ocean, you can see that black carbon and soot have covered most of the country so that the plant life cannot breathe, and that there is a constant haze of brownness over the continent. I had a story from a friend of mine, and he said he went to school children in India and asked them to make a landscape. They painted the sky brown because they've never seen blue skies. And this permanent haze that surrounds us is stifling. In China, because nobody's ever seen a real sunrise, a clear, clean sunrise, they install large, huge television sets in the Tiananmen Square so people can see what a sunrise looks like. So this is what we've done to our Earth. If you go around in the northern and the southern hemisphere, you won't find 1 square mile of pristine Earth left, either in the northern or the southern hemisphere. And the largest brunt of this is to be paid by the small developing countries in Africa or the large countries in China. They were not the ones to make the pollution, but they are to bear the burden. So what's the solution? We have to address this big disparity of wealth, where a few people in the world have enormous amounts of money and enormous amounts of power. And we can see this rising. This is just between our lifetime. This is during our watch. You can see that from 2000 to 2020, that the top 1% have as much wealth as the bottom 99%. So what's the answer? The answer is that we need to understand other people who are also like us. We need to understand that there is not just, what we can impart is not just pity, but compassion. So what does that mean? We wanted to unpack that word. And we get this word from an old Indian ideas. And one of the idea is that how can one be compassionate? And there's a famous poem, this is one of the texts from India, it's called the Upanishads. And what it says was, there was a little child who went to his father and asked, "Who am I?" And the father said that, if you look in the mountains and you see the sunrise of the mountain, that's what you are. If you look at the river flowing to the mountains, that's what you are. You are the birds that sing, you are the flowers that bloom, that's what you are. So the point of compassion is to realize that there is no difference between self and others, that the others are as precious and important as us, and the others are not just persons, but also the planet, the flowers, the the animals. And so as you realize that we are all part of this oneness, that is where the indication of what being compassionate means, is to be able to understand that there is unity in all of our living, and that we are part of this wonderful world and this little blue planet that we call home. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Dr. Aruni. Are there any immediate reactions from the other panelists, reflections?
Well, for me, I would say one that was jarring, right, to look at that research. It was also that you were so great on your time, but intimidating.
That clock, right? You got to live up to that, David, just so that you know.
Right, exactly. But you know, I don't know if it's this level of depth or in the weeds research. I've just been struck by this change in cities. So you started off with cities, right? So there was this great flight from cities, from the middle class and wealthy, mostly white, and there's a reversal now, right? So you have communities and poor communities of color going to the suburbs, and this more affluent white population coming back to the cities all over America. And I don't know if you've looked at that and its effect on communities.
Right, so the American cities are organized a bit different from the rest of the world, and it has been a movement in the last few years to get people back into the city and living in a way that is most efficient. And you hear this often, that there are lots of people in the world, it's teeming with people. But if you put people, and if they live like people live in New York City, everybody in the planet could fit into a space that would be less than the state of Texas, and you'll have still room to spare. So it's not so much that the cities create problems, they are very efficient. They bring people together, I think, and there is something of magic that happens in cities, that only cities like Athens and Florence and New York can reach the epitome of civilization. But we have to invent a new way of living in cities, a way that is cleaner and safer and compassionate and is equitable, so that all members could find a way to live in the cities and interact with each other.
Thank you.
So I had one question on the slide where you had the 5, like the heart disease, and number 2 was unintentional injuries.
Yes.
Can you give a little bit of what that looks like? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, because I do violence prevention work, is any of that tied to, because I know lead has a correlation and stuff like that, so.
Right, so these are environmental burden of disease. So most of the time there is a sort of untoward effect of the environment. It relates to cardiovascular or cardiac deaths. But the number 2 was unintentional injuries, which means like, there was a leakage from a power plant, there was a poisoning of the river, the Flint, Michigan episode, and all these diseases that come out because we are not deliberately trying to hurt anybody, but we are careless in the way we are running the world.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah. Well, my only comment, since I have to talk about the budgetary implications of this, is that what's very clear is that a great deal of the cost of our budget, particularly in the federal government, is attributable to things that we don't price into the budget, which brings up the whole argument of carbon taxes and so forth. And so it sets the framework very well for the debates that we're having now, and we'll have many more in the future.
Yeah. And we hope some people are receptive to these ideas.
Well, Dr. Bhatnagar, I want to thank you for this comment, this quote that I will forever use now, a wound in the heart of the nation. And I think that's what we need to remember as we think about how to plan as we move forward. And I just, with the last minute, if you could just sort of talk to us about, give me one thing that we could do here in Louisville that might change this wound in the heart of our nation.
Just one word, education.
No. There you go.
We need to, so education is first the realization of a problem, then an understanding of the problem, and the third is search for a solution to the problem. We need to have our youth educated, involved into our communities. We need to make them realize that this is home and this is what we belong. I travel everywhere, talk to everyone, and people say that you're from Kentucky, look what it is. Why are people not doing anything? Little they realize that the problem is so enormous that we cannot address all the dimensions of the problem. But to start with, I think if we have better education and people are more involved in the communities, that we might be able to find our own solutions. We're not looking for pity or handouts or some other force to come and sort of rescue us from our mess, but we have to find our own solutions locally.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.